Count Corla. I'm disappointed that you think you're going to get your job back, Minister. I kind of have my eye on it myself, and I know Deputy Wallace is pretty hopeful of getting justice, but you never know. This question, I think, is very important. It's asking you to review the deployment of Irish Defence Forces personnel in the Golan Heights, given the failure of the UNDOF mission, now over 40 years old, and the virtual annexation of Syrian territory by the Israelis. I really don't think it's an appropriate intervention for an Irish peacekeeping personnel to be deployed in, and there's far better areas that they could be doing better work.
Minister.
Yeah, look, I won't surprise the Deputy to hear that I don't agree with that view. And I've been to occupied Golan twice now to meet our troops there. They've been involved in a very complex mission in recent years. This was a very stable mission up until a few years ago, but it is an important one. And I would take my lead from what the UN are looking for collectively there, as opposed to what individuals may be looking for. The UNDOF mission was established back in 1974 by the United Nations Security Council, following the agreed disengagement of the Israeli and Syrian forces on the Golan Heights in May 1974. And to be clear, UNDOF was established to maintain the ceasefire between Israel and Syria, supervise the disengagement of Israeli and Syrian forces, and supervise the areas of separation and limitation as provided in the May 1974 agreement on disengagement. Since 1974, the mandate of UNDOF has been renewed every 6 months, most recently renewed in June 2015 until the 30th of June 2016 under the appropriate resolutions. A contingent of the permanent defence forces, comprising of 131 personnel, have been deployed to UNDOF on the Golan Heights since 2013. 8 other Defence Force personnel were also deployed in UNDOF headquarters, including the Deputy Force Commander, Brigadier General Anthony Hanlon, who's doing a really good job on that mission. But on the broader issues, I don't think that we should view UNDOF in the context of making a political point to anybody. This is about keeping two countries apart. It's been successful in doing that. It faces real challenges at the moment, given the civil war, which is extremely complex in Syria, and you can actually see the fighting going on from a number of the outposts that are manned by UNDOF personnel.
Thank you, Minister.
But certainly the idea that we would pull out of that mission is something that I think the United Nations would be really concerned about, because I think the Irish contingent is a really core and effective part of that overall mission. And I think that our troops are doing very worthwhile work there, and I think we should be proud of that. I think we should support them as opposed to undermining what they're trying to do.
Call Deputy Clare Daly.
I think the fact is, Minister, if two sides wanted to attack each other, the Irish troops in the middle weren't going to put a stop to that. But the reality, of course, has been, and as has been pointed out by some good Israeli journalists about that, in reality the presence of the UN forces in Golan is actually helping to perpetuate Israeli occupation of the area and has made the world accustomed to the diplomatic status quo. Now, the points of the question, I think, also refer to about the fact that not only have the Israelis illegally annexed this territory, but they have now authorised multinational corporations, including those sponsored by Dick Cheney, to drill for oil. They've made it clear that their intention is to keep the proceeds of that. There's been multiple news reports in the Israeli press over the past period, basically saying that we've always been clear that Israel is not returning the Golan Heights to Syria, but now that the brutal, the neighbouring war is continuing to rage, we can make that a reality for everybody else. So basically they're using the crisis in Syria to further economic and illegal settlement interests there, and we're standing there allowing it to happen.
Minister.
Yeah, could I just say that in the most recent report on UNDOF, the UN Secretary General himself has stated that the continued presence of UNDOF in the area remains essential, and that both Israel and the Syrian Arab Republic have stated their continued commitment to the disengagement of forces agreement and the presence of UNDOF. In order to implement its mandate, UNDOF continues to engage with the parties on practical arrangements to allow the force to continue to maintain the ceasefire from the Israeli-occupied side of the Golan Heights. In other words, our troops are there as a stabilising influence. Deputy, I suspect you've been to the Middle East because I know you're interested in these things. But I mean, this is a region that's on fire at the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And what we are there to try and bring some calm, some international observation to a region that has extraordinarily difficult conflict to overcome.
Thank you, Minister.
And the idea that actually removing UNDOF from the stabilising role that they're playing on the Golan Heights at the moment, which isn't a flashpoint between Israel and Syria any longer, for the moment anyway. The idea that actually we would reduce or remove that stabilising factor for some other political reasons or to make a statement, I think would be highly irresponsible, and we're not going to do it.
Deputy Clare Daly.
As you say, Minister, the region is clearly on fire, but the reality is the troops and the role that they're playing there is not one of a stabilising influence, but in actual fact they're basically being, as Ed Horgan put it in a very good article in the press, they're being used as human shields to protect, in essence, the Israeli illegal annexation of the Syrian Golan Heights. It is as simple as that, really, in many ways. And there are other points around the world where they could play an active peacekeeping role, which they're not playing in that region at the moment. You've acknowledged the fact that it isn't an area of conflict between the two powers in that territory. So I think particularly, given that the Israelis have invested so much money in illegal settlements in that area, I'm sure you know that last year Netanyahu tried to even get the American administration to think differently regarding the annexation and to formally recognise that territory as Israel. Even the Americans couldn't do that at this stage. But that's the intention, and that's what's going on there. And we have our troops there when they could be, for example, in Darfur, in the Congo, in South Sudan. And let's remember, this UNDOF mission is there for 40 years. You can hardly call it a success, and its intention was to get a withdrawal from that area, not to annex territory, which is what's going on here now.
Sorry, that wasn't its intention was to ensure that hostilities didn't begin again between Syria and Israel.
For negotiated settlement.
And it's been successful. This was about recognising and enforcing a disengagement agreement and treaty.
And negotiated settlement.
Right? And no, it was about enforcing a disengagement agreement. The issue here is the success of this mission has been, and it's been a relatively stable mission until a few years ago, the success of this mission has effectively to keep two warring parties apart. And that has worked. What has made it a much more complex mission in recent years is a civil war in Syria. And your accusations about human shields, I'm sorry, they just don't stand up, given what happened last summer, or actually the summer before last, where UN troops were actually kidnapped and shot at.
Thank you.
So the issue here is, and the judgment call is, do you listen to the UN Secretary General, who's asking us to stay, to continue to be a stabilising factor in the region? Do you listen to both countries on either side, who both want UNDOF to stay in place as a stabilising factor? Or do you listen to Deputy Daly?
Thank you. I have to go on to the next question. Deputy Sean Farrell, I'd ask members to please watch the clock when they're